The morning sun spilled through the windows of Maplewood Diner, catching on the chrome edges of the countertop and casting long shadows across the checkered floor. The air smelled of butter and coffee, a comforting constant in a town where little else remained certain. Sarah Mitchell sat alone at a corner booth, her wheelchair positioned at an angle that allowed her to see most of the diner while still maintaining some privacy. Her fingers, once calloused from years of gymnastics, now moved delicately across the page of her sketchbook, capturing the weathered face of an elderly man sipping coffee 3 tables away. The jukebox in the corner played Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA, a fitting anthem for this slice of 1987 small-town America. On the television above the counter, President Reagan addressed the nation about something Sarah wasn't paying attention to. Millhaven, Pennsylvania had bigger problems than whatever was happening in Washington. The steel mill that had once been the town's lifeblood had closed 2 years ago, leaving half the population unemployed and the other half wondering if they would be next. Sarah's pencil paused over the paper as the bell above the door jingled. She didn't need to look up to know who had entered. The sudden hush of conversation told her everything. Dean Harrington and his friends had arrived, bringing with them the swagger that came from being the son of the town's mayor. Sarah lowered her head, focusing intently on her drawing, hoping they wouldn't notice her. It had been foolish to come here alone, but the diner had the best pancakes in town, and she refused to let fear dictate her life more than her wheelchair already did. Well, look who it is, Dean's voice carried across the diner. If it isn't the artist formerly known as Standing. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't look up. 2 years had passed since the car accident that took her legs, and still Dean couldn't let go of their high school rivalry. Before the accident, Sarah had been Millhaven High's star gymnast, destined for a college scholarship. Dean had been the baseball star with a mean streak. Their paths had crossed when Sarah's satirical drawing of Dean had made it into the school paper, earning her his eternal enmity, and him a month of mockery. Dean's expensive Nike sneakers appeared in Sarah's peripheral vision, followed by his designer jeans and varsity jacket. The red and white of Millhaven High's colors seemed garish in the soft light of the diner. "I'm talking to you, wheel girl," Dean said, his voice lower now, meant only for her ears. Sarah finally looked up to her green eyes meeting his blue ones without flinching. "I'm trying to enjoy my breakfast, Dean. Don't you have something better to do? Like practicing how to throw a ball without dislocating your shoulder again?" Dean's face darkened at the reminder of his failed tryout for the minor leagues. Behind him, his two friends exchanged glances. They were all 19, same as Sarah, but in this moment they seemed younger, childish in their petty cruelty. From the kitchen doorway, Frank Calloway watched the interaction with concern etched into his weathered face. At 68, the former Marine had seen his share of bullies, both on the battlefield during the Korean War and in the decades since. He caught the eye of Jake Turner, the new waiter who was refilling coffee cups across the room. Jake nodded slightly, understanding the silent communication. "Everything all right over here?" Jake asked, approaching Sarah's table with a coffee pot in hand. At 26, Jake was older than the teenagers, but still young enough to seem approachable. His short haircut and rigid posture betrayed his military background to those who knew what to look for. "Fine," Sarah said, not wanting to create a scene. Dean smirked. "Just catching up with an old friend. Isn't that right, Sarah?" Sarah's plate of pancakes sat before her untouched. She'd been saving them, savoring the anticipation almost as much as she would the taste. Dean noticed her gaze drift to the food, and something cruel flickered in his eyes. "Still drawing your little pictures?" Dean asked, reaching for her sketchbook. "Let's see what we've got here." Sarah pulled the book away. "Don't touch my things." "Or what? You'll run away." Dean laughed, and his friends joined in. Jake set down the coffee pot. "I think the lady asked you to leave her alone." Dean turned, sizing up Jake with a dismissive glance. "You new in town? You should know who you're talking to. My father owns half of Millhaven, including this dump." "And your father might own the building," Jake replied evenly, "but in here, everyone deserves respect." From his booth across the diner, an older man watched the escalating situation with keen interest. William Wild Bill Cooper had seen trouble brewing the moment Dean and his cronies walked in. At 72, Bill had long ago learned to read a room, a skill that had kept him alive through frozen Korean battlefields in the tumultuous decades that followed. He noted the tension in Jake's shoulders, the protective stance Frank had taken at the kitchen door, and most importantly, the defiance in Sarah's eyes. Dean turned his attention back to Sarah. You know I never did thank you for that drawing you did of me. The one where I was striking out while checking myself out in a mirror. Real creative. Just telling it like I saw it, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Dean's smile vanished. In one swift motion, he slapped his hand against the edge of Sarah's plate, sending pancake syrup and dishes crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the diner, punctuated by a few gasps from other customers. Oops, Dean said flatly. Guess you won't be eating those. Sarah stared at the mess her breakfast scattered across the checkered tiles. Something inside her snapped. She grabbed her glass of water and threw it directly into Dean's face. The liquid splashed across his perfect hair and designer clothes dripping down onto his white sneakers. Dean's face contorted with rage. You crazy bitch. He grabbed the handles of Sarah's wheelchair and jerked it backward. Bill Cooper had seen enough. He quietly slipped out of his booth and through the diner's side door. Once outside, he reached into his leather jacket and pulled out a bulky Motorola Dynatac 8000X mobile phone, one of the first of its kind and a testament to his financial success. He dialed a number from memory, waiting as it rang. Code Blue at Maplewood, Bill said quietly when someone answered. Eagle's daughter is in trouble. He ended the call without waiting for a response and returned to the diner. Inside, the situation had escalated. Frank had emerged from the kitchen, a large carving knife in his hand. He wasn't brandishing it as a weapon, but its presence served as a silent warning. That's enough, Frank said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded men in battle. Dean, you and your friends need to leave, now. Dean's friend had a grip on Sarah's wheelchair, preventing her from moving. Jake stood nearby, clearly calculating whether physical intervention would help or worsen the situation. Mind your own business, old man, Dean sneered at Frank. Unless you want my father to hear about how you threatened the mayor's son with a knife. Sarah raised her hand. I don't need anyone fighting my battles. Despite the tremor in her voice, her words carried strength. She reached into her bag and pulled out her sketchbook, flipping to a page she had completed weeks ago. The drawing showed a man in military dress uniform, his face weathered but proud. Beneath the portrait she had written, Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. This is my father, Sarah said, turning the book so Dean could see. Master Sergeant James Mitchell, Silver Star, recipient. He taught me that bullies like you are just cowards wearing masks of confidence. She closed the book gently. He also taught me that sometimes the best response is to stand your ground, even when you can't stand at all. The diner had gone completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Bill Cooper approached Dean, his footsteps deliberate against the linoleum floor. Without a word, he placed a metal challenge coin on the table beside Sarah. The Korean War veteran medallion gleamed under the fluorescent lights. That's the daughter of a hero's son, Bill said quietly to Dean. Think carefully about your next move. Dean looked at the coin, then at Bill's weathered face. Something in the old man's eyes made him take a step back. Whatever, Dean muttered, trying to maintain his facade of control. I don't have time for this anyway. He turned to leave, but as he passed Bill, he deliberately bumped his shoulder against the older man's. Bill barely moved his feet, planted with the stability of someone who had stood against artillery fire. The contrast between the elderly man's composed dignity and Dean's childish aggression was stark. Jake stepped forward. I think it's time for you to go, Dean. Dean pointed a finger at Jake. You just lost your job, whatever your name is. My father will hear about this. Your father doesn't own me, Jake replied. And my name is Turner, Jake Turner, former Army Ranger. You might want to remember that. Dean and his friends backed toward the door, their bravado diminishing with each step. This isn't over, Dean called as they left, the bell jingling with finality as the door closed behind them. The diner slowly returned to life. Frank returned the knife to the kitchen, while Jake helped Sarah clean up the mess on the floor. Bill sat down at Sarah's booth without invitation. Thank you, Sarah said to him, but that wasn't necessary. I can handle Dean Harrington. Bill's weathered face crinkled into a smile. I don't doubt that for a second, young lady. You've got your father's spirit. He extended a hand. William Cooper. Most folks call me Wild Bill, though that nickname's more ironic than accurate these days. Sarah shook his hand, surprised by the firmness of his grip. You knew my father. Bill nodded. Jim and I served together in Korea. chosen Reservoir winner of 1950. Coldest I have ever been in my life, and that includes growing up in Minnesota. His eyes took on a distant look. Your father saved our entire unit when Chinese forces had us surrounded. Led a counterattack that opened an escape route. 17 men made it home because of him. Sarah stared at Bill. Her mother had told her stories of her father's heroism, but hearing it from someone who had been there made it real in a way it had never been before. He never talked about it, she said quietly. The best ones never do, Bill replied. He gestured to Jake, who was clearing the last of the broken dishes. Frank, bring this young lady a fresh plate of pancakes. On me. Frank nodded from across the diner. Coming right up, Bill. Jake finished cleaning and took a seat at the counter, keeping a watchful eye on the door in case Dean returned. Sarah noticed how he positioned himself with a clear view of both entrances, another habit from military training. My father died when I was 12, Sarah told Bill. Car accident. Ironic that 4 years later another crash would put me in this chair. She tapped the wheel of her wheelchair. Mom says we both got his stubborn streak. He refused to die in Korea, and I refused to die on Route 16. Bill's eyes softened. Jim was more than just stubborn. He was principled, always stood up for what was right even when it wasn't popular. He hesitated, then reached into his wallet and pulled out a faded photograph. This might surprise you. Sarah took the photo, her eyes widening at what she saw. The image showed a group of men in leather jackets standing beside motorcycles. In the center stood her father, younger than she had ever seen him, in pictures his arm thrown around the shoulders of a much younger Bill. The Iron Veterans, Bill explained. Motorcycle club founded by Korean war vets who needed the brotherhood after coming home. Your father was a founding member. Sarah stared at the photo, unable to reconcile this image with the straight-laced father she remembered. Mom never told me. After he met your mother, he didn't ride as much, but he never formally left the club. Bill tapped the patch visible on her father's jacket in the photo. Once an Iron Veteran, always an Iron Veteran. Jake approached the table, having overheard the conversation. Master Sergeant Mitchell, he said with respect. He was a legend among the younger guys, too. Sarah looked up at him, confused. You knew my father? Jake nodded. He was my training officer when I first enlisted. Toughest instructor at Fort Benning, but also the fairest. He's the reason I made it through Ranger School. He smiled slightly. I've been trying to track down his family since I got discharged last year to tell them what an impact he made. Never thought I'd find you here. Sarah felt overwhelmed by these connections to her father that had suddenly appeared. For years after his death, it had been just her and her mother keeping his memory alive through stories and the few photographs they had. Now suddenly here were people who had known him in ways she never had. He would be proud of you, Jake said, noticing her expression. Standing up to that jerk took courage. Frank arrived with a fresh plate of pancakes, setting them down in front of Sarah. On the house, he said, ignoring Bill's attempt to pay. Any daughter of Jim Mitchell eats free in my diner. Sarah looked around at these three men, each connected to her father in different ways, each now standing up for her. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The moment was interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming outside. Through the window, Sarah could see Dean returning with two much larger friends, members of the football team, judging by their size. Looks like trouble's back, Jake muttered. Frank reached for the phone behind the counter. I'll call the police. Don't bother, Bill said, his eyes still on the approaching young men. Sheriff's on Harrington's payroll. They'll take 30 minutes to respond, and then they'll do nothing. The bell jangled as Dean pushed through the door, his two massive friends flanking him like bodyguards. His hair was still damp from Sarah's water attack, and his eyes burned with humiliation turned to rage. You think that was funny? Dean demanded, striding towards Sarah's table. Nobody makes a fool out of me in public. Jake moved to intercept, but one of Dean's friends stepped in front of him. The size difference was considerable, with the football player towering over Jake's compact frame. Bill remained seated, seemingly unconcerned by the escalating situation. You've already made a fool of yourself, son. No help needed from anyone else. Dean ignored him, focusing on Sarah. You're going to apologize, right now. Or my friends here are going to take that fancy wheelchair of yours for a ride without you in it. Sarah felt fear curl in her stomach, but refused to show it. I'm not apologizing for defending myself against a bully. Wrong answer, Dean snarled, nodding to one of his friends who moved towards Sarah's wheelchair. Frank emerged from the kitchen again, this time carrying a heavy cast-iron skillet that was still steaming. Touch her, and you'll be eating through a straw for the next 6 months. The football player hesitated, looking to Dean for guidance. The other customers in the diner had gone silent again, some leaving money on their tables and quietly exiting, others watching with morbid fascination. Bill Cooper slowly stood up, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Dean, did your father ever tell you about a group called the Iron Veterans? Dean frowned, momentarily distracted. What? The Iron Veterans, Bill repeated. Motorcycle club founded after the Korean War. Your father knows us well. He cocked his head slightly. Very well indeed. Before Dean could respond, the distant rumble of motorcycle engines became audible. The sound grew steadily louder, like approaching thunder on a clear day. Bill smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face into something almost predatory. Perfect timing. Outside, the first of the motorcycles pulled into the diner's parking lot. Not just any motorcycles, but vintage Harley-Davidsons, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. One after another, they arrived, forming a perfect line across the front of the diner. Sarah counted 15 riders, all men in their 60s or older, each wearing a leather jacket emblazoned with the same patch she had seen in the photograph of her father. Dean and his friends moved to the window, watching as the riders dismounted with the practiced ease of men who had been riding for decades. Leading them was a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair, cut military short. His beard was neatly trimmed, and despite his age, he moved with the fluid confidence of someone half his years. That's Colonel Jack Thompson, Bill explained to Sarah. Korean War Special Forces, later served in Vietnam and a dozen other conflicts that never made the news. He's been leading the Iron Veterans since your father stepped down. The bell above the door jingled once more as Colonel Thompson entered, followed by two other riders. The colonel surveyed the room with the tactical assessment of a career soldier, his eyes landing briefly on Dean and his friends before finding Sarah. William, he nodded to Bill. This the situation you called about? Bill gestured to Sarah. Colonel meets Sarah Mitchell, Jim's daughter. The colonel's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. He approached Sarah's table and extended his hand. Your father was one of the finest men I ever knew. It's an honor to meet you, Miss Mitchell. Sarah shook his hand, feeling the calluses that decades of motorcycle riding and military service had left behind. Thank you, sir. Colonel Thompson turned to face Dean, who had backed up slightly, his bravado diminishing in the face of 15 veteran bikers. And you must be Harrington's boy. Dean tried to stand taller. My father is the mayor of this town. I'm well aware of who your father is. The colonel replied, his voice level but carrying an undercurrent of steel. Robert Harrington and I have history. The colonel took a step closer to Dean. Despite his age, he was still an imposing figure with shoulders broadened by decades of physical labor and military service. I understand you've been causing problems for Miss Mitchell here. Dean glanced nervously at his friends, who seemed less eager to intervene now that the odds had shifted dramatically. This is none of your business, old man. A ripple of tension passed through the assembled veterans. Several took steps forward, but the colonel raised a hand, stopping them. You know, son, he said conversationally, one of the first things they teach you in the military is how to read a situation. Right now, you're outnumbered, outflanked, and facing men who've survived far worse than anything you could imagine. He smiled without warmth. But more importantly, you're on the wrong side of right, and that's something your father should have taught you to avoid. Dean's face flushed with anger. Don't talk about my father, you don't know anything. I know Robert Harrington was disciplined for conduct unbecoming an officer during his brief military career, the colonel replied. I know he received a dishonorable discharge after less than a year of service. And I know he's been lying about his military record ever since building his political career on stolen valor. The color drained from Dean's face. You're lying. Sarah watched this exchange with growing understanding. She remembered overhearing her parents talking years ago, her father's voice uncharacteristically angry as he spoke about that opportunist Bob Harrington. Now the pieces were falling into place. Unable to help herself, Sarah reached for her sketchbook and began drawing rapidly, capturing the confrontation unfolding before her. Her pencil moved across the page with a practiced precision, outlining the colonel's commanding presence facing off against the dean's faltering confidence. Dean noticed her drawing and lunged forward, grabbing for the sketchbook. "Stop drawing me, you crippled freak." His movement was so sudden that no one had time to intervene. But before he could reach Sarah, the colonel's hand shot out, grasping Dean's wrist with surprising strength. "That was a mistake, son," the colonel said quietly. Dean tried to pull free, but the older man's grip was like iron. One of Dean's friends moved to help but found his path blocked by two veterans who had silently positioned themselves in the way. "Let go of me," Dean demanded, his voice rising with panic. "When you apologize to the lady," the colonel replied calmly. Dean struggled for another moment before realizing the futility of resistance. "Fine, I'm sorry. Okay, now, let go." The colonel released him, and Dean stumbled backward, rubbing his wrist. His two friends looked to him uncertainly. "Let's get out of here," one of them muttered. "This isn't worth it." Dean looked around at the assembled veterans, at Sarah calmly continuing her drawing, at Jake and Frank standing ready to defend her. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "This isn't over," he said, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. As Dean and his friends retreated toward the door, it swung open once more. A man in an expensive suit stood, framed in the doorway, his silver hair and confident posture marking him immediately as someone accustomed to authority. Mayor Robert Harrington had arrived. "What's going on here?" he demanded, taking in the scene with obvious displeasure. "I got a call about some kind of disturbance at the diner." His eyes passed over the assembled veterans without recognition at first. Then he spotted Colonel Thompson, and his face went rigid with shock. "Jack," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "it's been a long time." "Not long enough, Bob," the colonel replied. "We need to talk." Robert glanced at his son, noting the damp clothes and red wrist. "Dean, wait in the car." "But Dad." "Now, Dean." The command was absolute. Dean shot one final glare at Sarah before leaving his friends following close behind. The mayor gestured toward the back of the diner. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" Frank nodded. "My office." As the mayor and the colonel disappeared into the back room, the tension in the diner began to dissipate. The other veterans spread out, some taking seats at the counter, others introducing themselves to Sarah. One of them, a burly man with a full white beard, pointed to her drawing. "You've got talent, just like your dad said." Sarah looked up in surprise. "My father talked about my drawing." The man nodded. "Jim was always showing us your artwork, bragging about how his little girl was going to be a famous artist someday. He carried some of your drawings in his wallet." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. She had always drawn for herself a private passion that helped her process the world. The idea that her father had been proud enough of her talent to share it with his friends touched her deeply. Another veteran approached this one wearing a patch that identified him as a medic. "Your father saved my life at Chosin. Carried me 3 miles through snow after I took shrapnel in both legs." He tapped Sarah's wheelchair. "Guess we've got something in common now." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I guess we do." More veterans gathered around, each with a story about her father. Sarah listened, absorbing these new dimensions of the man she had lost too soon. As they talked, she continued sketching, capturing their faces, their expressions, creating a visual record of this unexpected reunion. Jake brought coffee for everyone, moving with the efficiency of someone used to serving groups. He paused beside Sarah, watching her draw. "You really are talented," he said quietly. "Thanks," Sarah replied, adding shading to the portrait she was working on. "I always wanted to be an artist, but after the accident, it became more than a dream. It became therapy." Jake nodded in understanding. "After I came back from Grenada, I had nightmares. Drawing helped me too, though I'm nowhere near as good as you." Before Sarah could respond, the door to Frank's office opened, and the colonel emerged alone. His face was grim as he approached the group. "Where's the mayor?" one of the veterans asked. "Taking a moment to collect himself," the colonel replied. He turned to Sarah. "Miss Mitchell, I'm afraid I have some disturbing news about your accident." Sarah set down her pencil, a sense of foreboding washing over her. "What about it?" "The road where your accident occurred was built by Harrington Construction. According to documents we've obtained, they cut corners on materials, ignored safety regulations, and bribed inspectors to look the other way." The colonel's voice was gentle but firm. "The guardrail that failed was improperly installed. It should have prevented your car from going down that embankment." Sarah felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. Are you saying my accident wasn't an accident? I'm saying it was preventable. And Robert Harrington is directly responsible for the conditions that caused it. The implications washed over Sarah in waves. Her life in a wheelchair, the pain she had endured, the dreams she had abandoned, all because of corruption and greed. She looked toward the office where the mayor remained hidden. Did he admit it? She asked. The colonel nodded. He did, and more. Your father suspected something was wrong with the municipal contracts Harrington was receiving. He was asking questions, reviewing documents. You think that's why Dad had that falling out with the mayor before he died? Sarah asked, pieces of her childhood memories suddenly realigning. I think your father was a threat to Harrington's operation, the colonel said carefully. And while I can't prove it yet, I find the timing of his fatal accident suspicious. A cold shock ran through Sarah. She had never questioned the circumstances of her father's death. A rainy night, a slick road, a tragic accident. But now doubt crept in like a poison. The door to Frank's office opened again, and Mayor Harrington emerged, his face ashen. He looked at the assembled veterans, at Sarah, and then at his own hands. I've made mistakes, he said, his voice barely audible. Terrible mistakes. Mistakes, the word burst from Sarah with unexpected force. You call ruining lives a mistake? The mayor flinched as if she had struck him. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. But they did, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. I did, and maybe my father too. Robert Harrington had no response to that. He straightened his tie, a reflexive gesture that seemed absurdly inadequate to the moment. I need to speak with my lawyer, he said finally, and my son. As he left the diner, the bell jingling with inappropriate cheerfulness, Sarah felt a strange mixture of vindication and emptiness. Learning the truth should have been cathartic, but instead, it had only opened new wounds. The colonel placed a hand on her shoulder. This isn't over, Miss Mitchell. We came here today because Bill called, but we're staying because justice hasn't been served. The Iron veterans take care of their own, and Jim Mitchell was one of our own, which makes you family too. Sarah looked up at him, then at the circle of veterans surrounding her. Men who had fought in wars, who had seen the worst of humanity, now standing ready to fight for her. And beyond them, Jake and Frank, new allies in an unexpected battle. What happens now? She asked. The colonel's weathered face creased into a determined smile. Now we do what the Iron veterans have always done. We ride together against the storm. Outside, the line of motorcycles gleamed in the sun, their engines silent but ready. Sarah wheeled herself to the window, looking at them not as symbols of rebellion, but as chariots of justice. In her mind, she could almost see her father among them, leather jacket on his shoulders, the wind in his hair. For the first time since her accident, Sarah felt something beyond acceptance or resignation. She felt purpose. And as the morning sun climbed higher in the Pennsylvania sky, casting long shadows from the motorcycles across the diner's parking lot, she knew that her life was about to change once again. The distant rumble of thunder echoed across the valley, promising a storm to come. But Sarah Mitchell was no longer afraid of storms. She was becoming one. The Iron Veterans Clubhouse stood on the outskirts of Mill Haven, a converted warehouse that had once served as a storage facility for the now defunct steel mill. From the outside, it looked unremarkable, its weathered brick facade and small windows, giving little indication of what lay within. A simple sign above the entrance displayed their emblem, an eagle clutching a motorcycle chain wings, spread against a backdrop of the American flag. Sarah Mitchell sat in her wheelchair at the entrance, momentarily hesitant. 2 hours had passed since the confrontation at Maplewood Diner. Colonel Thompson had invited her to their meeting place, promising answers about her father and the accident that had changed her life. The sound of her mother's warning echoed in her mind, be home by dinner, stay safe, call if there's trouble. But some truths were worth seeking, even if they led to uncomfortable places. She pushed forward, the door swinging open more easily than expected. Inside, the clubhouse revealed itself as a surprisingly warm and organized space. The main room was large, with exposed beams overhead and concrete floors softened by area rugs. Vintage motorcycles lined one wall, each one pristine, each with a small plaque naming its owner in military service. Photographs covered another wall, hundreds of them, telling the story of the Iron veterans across decades. Colonel Thompson stood near a large wooden table at the center of the room, deep in conversation with several other veterans. He looked up as Sarah entered, his stern face softening slightly. "Miss Mitchell," he acknowledged, crossing the room to greet her. "Thank you for coming." Sarah wheeled herself further inside, taking in the memorabilia and military honors displayed throughout the space. "This isn't what I expected." The colonel smiled. "People often have misconceptions about motorcycle clubs. The media portrays us as outlaws and troublemakers. The reality is more complex." He guided her toward the wall of photographs, pointing to an image of young men in military uniforms standing beside early model motorcycles. The Iron Veterans began in 1954, founded by Korean War veterans who found civilian life challenging. Back then, the country understood World War II soldiers, but Korea was the forgotten war. Many returned to find no parades, no recognition, and precious little support. Sarah studied the photograph, recognizing a much younger Wild Bill among the men. "Why motorcycles?" "Freedom," the colonel said simply. "After the regimented life of the military and the confines of frozen foxholes, there's something liberating about the open road. The brotherhood we had in combat, we found again in riding together." He moved down the wall, stopping at another photograph. This one showed a larger group in the late 1960s, and there in the center stood Sarah's father. He looked young and carefree, his arm thrown around Bill Cooper's shoulders, both wearing the Iron Veterans leather jackets. "Your father joined in 1967, shortly after returning from his first tour as an advisor. He found in us what many veterans seek: understanding without explanation. Civilians mean well, but they can't comprehend what we've seen, what we've done." The colonel tapped the photo gently. "But Jim understood, and we understood him." Sarah stared at the image of her father, so different from the stern but loving man she remembered. "I never knew any of this. Mom never mentioned his involvement with the motorcycle club." "Eleanor had her reasons, I'm sure." The colonel guided her wheelchair toward the central table where several other veterans had gathered. "Jim stepped back when you were born, wanted to be the father you deserved. But he never formally left. Once an Iron Veteran, always an Iron Veteran." The men around the table stood as Sarah approached. She recognized some from the diner earlier, but others were new faces, all bearing the unmistakable mark of age and experience. The colonel introduced them one by one, each with his rank and service history. Major Reynolds, Air Force, Korea and Vietnam. Sergeant Williams, Army, Lebanon. Corporal Martinez, Marines, Grenada. The list continued, a living chronology of American military engagements. "And this," the colonel said, indicating a woman in her late 50s who had just entered from a side room, "is Dr. Eleanor Doc Martinez, former Army nurse and one of our most valued members." Doc Martinez had silver streaks through her dark hair, pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much suffering, but her eyes remained sharp and assessing. She stepped forward, extending a hand to Sarah. "Your father spoke of you often," she said, her voice carrying a subtle accent. "He was very proud of your determination." Sarah shook her hand, surprised by the firm grip. "You're not what I expected to find in a motorcycle club." Doc smiled. "I had to fight twice as hard for my place here. First as a Hispanic woman in the military medical corps, then as a female rider in a predominantly male world." She pulled up a chair beside Sarah. "But like you, I refuse to let others define my limitations." Colonel Thompson cleared his throat, bringing the group's attention to the matter at hand. "For those who weren't at the diner this morning, Terme has learned some disturbing information about her accident and potentially about her father's death." He laid out the facts, methodically explaining Robert Harrington's confession about the substandard materials used in the road construction. As he spoke, Sarah noticed Wild Bill quietly enter the room, taking a position near the back, his face grim. "What we know," the colonel continued, "is that Harrington Construction has been cutting corners on municipal projects for years. What we suspect, but cannot yet prove, is that Jim Mitchell discovered this before his death." Sarah leaned forward in her wheelchair. "Do you think Mayor Harrington had my father killed?" A heavy silence fell over the room. The colonel chose his words carefully. "We have no direct evidence of that. What we do have is a pattern of suspicious accidents involving people who crossed Robert Harrington. 3 in the last decade, all ruled accidental, all convenient for his business interest. And now we have his son terrorizing Jim's daughter," Wild Bill added from the back of the room. "That's no coincidence." Sarah felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. The car crash that took her father had always seemed like a cruel twist of fate. Now it looked increasingly like something more sinister. "What do you plan to do?" she asked. The colonel exchanged glances with the other veterans before responding. "We're going to expose Robert Harrington's corruption and bring him to justice through legal channels. We may be bikers, but we're not vigilantes. We respect the law even when others don't." He spread several folders on the table, opening them to reveal documents, photographs, and what appeared to be financial records. "We've been gathering evidence for months. One of our members works in the county records office. Another is a retired building inspector. They've documented dozens of violations, bribes, and cover-ups." Sarah looked through the nearest folder, recognizing the location of her accident in some of the photographs. Seeing the mangled guardrail that had failed to protect her car sent a shiver down her spine. "What's missing," the colonel continued, "is a compelling witness, someone who can put a human face to these crimes. That's where you come in, if you are willing." Sarah closed the folder, looking up at the circle of veterans surrounding her. "You want me to testify against the most powerful man in Millhaven?" Doc Martinez placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Only if you choose to. We understand the risks involved." Sarah thought about her life since the accident. The pain, the surgeries, the abandoned dreams of gymnastics competition. The nights spent crying when no one could see the frustration of adapting to a world not designed for wheelchairs. All because Robert Harrington had valued profit over safety. "I'll do it," she said firmly, "but I want to understand everything first. No more secrets, no more half-truths." The colonel nodded, satisfaction evident in his weathered face. "Then let's begin with what we know about your father's investigation." For the next hour, the Iron veterans laid out their case piece by painstaking piece. They showed Sarah municipal contracts with inflated costs, inspection reports with forged signatures, and bank records showing suspicious deposits to local officials. Throughout their presentation, Sarah took notes and made quick sketches, her artist's eye capturing details that might otherwise be missed. The door to the clubhouse opened again, admitting Jake Turner, the young veteran from the diner. He carried a paper bag that emitted the enticing aroma of food. "Thought you all might be hungry," he said, setting the bag on a side table. "Frank sent these over from the diner." Colonel Thompson introduced Jake to those who hadn't met him at the diner, explaining his connection to Jim Mitchell. "Jake served under your father during his training at Fort Benning. He's offered to help with our investigation." Jake nodded to Sarah. "I owe your father. He saw potential in me when others didn't." As they ate the sandwiches, Jake had brought the conversation turned to strategy. How to present their evidence, which authorities to approach, how to protect Sarah from retaliation. The veterans spoke with the precision of men accustomed to planning operations, considering contingencies and fallback positions. The town council meeting next week would be the ideal venue, Major Reynolds suggested. Public record media presence, maximum exposure. "Harrington controls the council," Sergeant Williams countered. "They'll shut it down before we can present anything meaningful." "Not if we bring state investigators," Wild Bill argued. "I have contacts in Harrisburg who would be very interested in municipal corruption." As the debate continued, Sarah found herself studying the veterans with an artist's perspective. These men, mostly in their 60s and 70s, should have been enjoying peaceful retirements. Instead, they were plotting like commandos, bringing their military training to bear against corruption in their hometown. There was something both tragic and inspiring about their determination. A sudden commotion outside interrupted the discussion. The distinctive sound of a car engine revving aggressively, then tires squealing on pavement. Colonel Thompson moved to the window with surprising speed for a man his age. "Harrington's boy," he reported grimly. "And he's not alone." Sarah wheeled herself to another window. Outside, Dean's Camaro sat idling in the parking lot, headlights illuminating the row of parked motorcycles. Beside it was a police cruiser, its light bar flashing, but siren silent. "Sheriff Morris," Wild Bill growled. "Harrington's lapdog." They watched as Dean emerged from his car, pointing animatedly at the clubhouse while talking to the sheriff. Even from a distance, his body language conveyed angry determination. "What's he doing here?" Sarah asked. "Looking for trouble," the colonel replied, "and hoping to intimidate us with his father's influence." The sheriff nodded to Dean, then approached the clubhouse door alone, his hand resting casually on his holster. The doorbell rang, its ordinary sound incongruous with the tension of the moment. Colonel Thompson moved to answer it, signaling the others to stay back. "Be civil," he advised, "but record everything." Doc Martinez discreetly positioned herself near Sarah, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Jake took up a position near the door, his stance relaxed but ready. The colonel opened the door, revealing Sheriff Morris, a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a florid face and suspicious eyes. "Evening, Sheriff. What brings you to our humble establishment?" The sheriff peered past him, scanning the room until his gaze settled on Sarah. "Got a complaint about a disturbance at Maplewood Diner this morning. Witness says your club members were harassing the mayor's son." "That's interesting," the colonel replied mildly, "because we have multiple witnesses who saw the exact opposite. The mayor's son assaulting a disabled young woman, destroying property, and making threats." Sheriff Morris's expression didn't change. "Well, now that's not what I heard. And seeing as the young lady in question is here with you, I'd say that supports the harassment claim." Sarah wheeled herself forward despite Doc's restraining hand. "I'm here voluntarily, Sheriff. These men helped me when Dean Harrington attacked me. There are at least a dozen witnesses who can confirm that." The sheriff regarded her with thinly veiled contempt. "Miss, I understand you've had a hard time since your accident, but making false accusations against the mayor's son isn't going to help your situation." The colonel's posture stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "Are you threatening this young woman, Sheriff?" "Just stating facts, Thompson. Nobody likes troublemakers in Millhaven." The sheriff's hand still rested on his holster, a subtle reminder of his authority. "Now I'm going to need statements from everyone who was at the diner this morning." "Of course," the colonel agreed easily. "We'll all be happy to provide sworn notarized statements. I assume you'll be collecting the same from all witnesses, including Frank Calloway and his staff." The sheriff frowned, clearly not expecting cooperation. "That won't be necessary. Just tell your people to stay away from Dean Harrington." The mayor is quite concerned about this harassment. Wild Bill stepped forward, his weathered face set in lines of barely controlled anger. "Funny how the mayor finds time to worry about his son being embarrassed, but not about the people injured by his company's negligence." Sheriff Morris's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Cooper. Slander is a serious charge." "So is criminal negligence," Bill retorted. "And evidence doesn't lie, even when officials do." The tension in the room was palpable. Sarah could feel the veterans around her coiling like springs, decades of military discipline holding back their anger. Even Jake, the youngest among them, had assumed the watchful stillness of a predator. The sheriff sensed the shift in atmosphere and took a step back toward the door. "You folks want to be careful about making accusations you can't back up. This is a small town with a long memory." "Indeed it is," the colonel agreed, his voice deceptively pleasant. "And we've been remembering things for a very long time. Now, unless you have an actual warrant or legitimate police business, I believe we're done here." Sheriff Morris hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded curtly. "We'll be watching you. All of you." His gaze lingered on Sarah before he turned and left. Through the window, they watched as he returned to his cruiser, speaking briefly with Dean before both vehicles departed, tires spitting gravel. "That went well," Doc Martinez said dryly once they were gone. The colonel closed and locked the door. "About as expected, Robert's using his influence to try to intimidate us." "It won't work," Wild Bill declared, though his confident tone didn't quite reach his eyes. "We've faced worse than corrupt small-town officials." Sarah looked around at the veterans, seeing the concern behind their determined expressions. "I've put you all at risk, haven't I?" The colonel shook his head firmly. "We chose this fight long before you arrived, Miss Mitchell. Your father started asking questions about Harrington Construction years ago. We're simply continuing his work." Jake, who had remained silent during the sheriff's visit, finally spoke. "They'll be watching the clubhouse now, and probably Sarah's home too." The implications settled over the room. Sarah thought of her mother working the night shift at the hospital, unaware of the gathering storm. "I need to warn my mom." "We'll handle that," Doc assured her. "One of our members will make sure she gets home safely tonight, and will explain everything." Colonel Thompson returned to the central table, gathering the folders they'd been reviewing. "This changes our timeline. Harrington knows we're onto him now. We need to move quickly before evidence starts disappearing." The veterans shifted into planning mode again, discussing secure storage locations for their documents, witness protection strategies, and contingency plans. Sarah watched them work, impressed by their methodical approach. These were not hot-headed vigilantes, but disciplined strategists applying military precision to a civilian problem. The clubhouse door opened again, this time admitting a young woman in her early 20s. She carried a laptop case and had the harried look of someone perpetually rushed. "Sorry I'm late," she announced to the room. "Traffic was insane coming from Harrisburg." The colonel gestured her over. "Sarah, this is Jessica Reed. She's a reporter for the Tribune and the granddaughter of one of our founding members." Jessica offered a quick smile and a handshake to Sarah. The colonel's being modest. "My grandfather was killed in Korea. The Iron Veterans put me through journalism school." She set her laptop on the table. "And now I get to repay that debt by helping expose Robert Harrington." Sarah immediately liked Jessica's direct approach. "You're going to publish the story?" "That's the plan," Jessica confirmed, opening her laptop. "But I need rock-solid evidence and compelling testimony. The Tribune's lawyers are nervous about taking on someone with Harrington's resources." The colonel spread their evidence folders before Jessica. "Will this be enough?" As Jessica reviewed the documents, Sarah found herself sketching the scene. The eager young reporter, the circle of aged veterans, the folders containing evidence of corruption. There was something powerful in the image, a passing of the torch from one generation to another. "This is good," Jessica said, finally looking up from the files. "But without testimony from witnesses, it's circumstantial. We need people willing to go on record." All eyes turned to Sarah. She met their gazes steadily. "I already said I would." Jessica studied her thoughtfully. "It won't be easy. Harrington will try to discredit you, portray you as bitter about your accident, possibly even question your mental stability." "I'm aware of the risks," Sir Sarah replied, "but I'm also my father's daughter." The colonel nodded with approval. "We'll need more than just Sarah's testimony. Jake, you witnessed Dean's behavior today. Will you go on record?" Jake didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. Frank will too," Wild Bill added, "and probably some of the other diner customers." Jessica made notes on her laptop. "Good start, but we need someone on the inside. Someone who can corroborate the falsified inspection reports and bribery allegations." A heavy silence fell over the room. Such a witness would be risking not just their reputation, but potentially their safety. The clubhouse door opened once more, this time without a knock. Every head turned, veterans instinctively reaching for weapons they no longer carried. But it was Dean Harrington who stood in the doorway alone, his usual arrogance replaced by an expression Sarah had never seen on him before: uncertainty. "I want to talk," he said, his voice lacking its usual swagger. "About my father." The reaction was immediate. Jake stepped between Dean and Sarah, his stance protective. Wild Bill moved to flank Dean, cutting off any potential retreat. The colonel remained where he was, studying the young man with calculating eyes. "You've got nerve coming here," Wild Bill growled. Dean raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I came alone, no sheriff, no backup." "Why, hey?" the colonel asked simply. Dean's gaze found Sarah's. "Because she deserves to know the truth, and because I'm tired of being part of the lie." The colonel nodded to Jake and Bill, who reluctantly stepped back, though they remained alert. "Come in then, but understand, if this is some kind of trick, you'll regret it." Dean entered cautiously, acutely aware of the hostile stares from every veteran in the room. He reached slowly into his jacket, freezing when several men tensed visibly. "Just papers," he explained carefully, withdrawing a folded envelope. "Documents from my father's office." He approached the central table, placing the envelope before the colonel. "These are copies of internal memos about the Route 16 project where Sarah had her accident. They detail the substandard materials used and the inspection reports that were falsified." The colonel opened the envelope, examining the contents, with Wild Bill looking over his shoulder. Jessica leaned forward, her reporter's instincts clearly engaged. "Why are you giving us this?" Sarah asked Dean directly. Dean met her gaze, then looked away, shame evident in his posture. "My father isn't who I thought he was. After what happened at the diner, he told me things, justifying his actions, explaining how business works in the real world." His voice took on a bitter edge. He was proud of it, proud of cheating and bribing and cutting corners. Said it was just being smart. Sarah studied him, searching for signs of deception, but finding only what appeared to be genuine distress. "And you suddenly developed a conscience." Dean winced at her tone but nodded. "I've been a jerk to you, to a lot of people. I won't pretend otherwise. But I never wanted anyone to get hurt." He gestured to the documents. When I realized my father's company was directly responsible for your accident, it changed things. The colonel finished reviewing the papers and looked up at Dean. These appear genuine, but they're not enough on their own. We'd need your testimony to authenticate them. I know, Dean acknowledged, and I'll do it. Whatever it takes to make this right. Sarah exchanged glances with the colonel, seeing her own skepticism reflected in his eyes. Dean's apparent change of heart seemed too sudden, too convenient. Why should we trust you? Wild Bill demanded, giving voice to everyone's doubt. A few hours ago, you were threatening Sarah. Now you want to help her. That doesn't add up. Dean's shoulders slumped. I don't expect you to trust me. I haven't earned that. But these documents are real, and I'll testify to that under oath. Jessica interrupted her reporter's instincts, clearly sensing a story angle. Dean, are you willing to go on record about your father's business practices, with your name attached to the statements? Yes, Dean said without hesitation. I'm done being his puppet. The colonel studied Dean with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen men at their best and worst. Understand what you're proposing. Your father won't forgive this betrayal. You'll be cutting ties with your family, potentially facing threats or worse. I know, Dean replied, but I can't keep living with this. Not after seeing what it's done to people like Sarah. Sarah wheeled herself closer to Dean, noting how he forced himself not to step back. If this is a trick or some kind of trap to discredit us later, I will personally make sure everyone in Millhaven knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Dean met her eyes directly for the first time. Fair enough. The colonel made a decision. We'll verify these documents independently. In the meantime, you'll stay here where we can keep an eye on you. Dean nodded, seemingly relieved rather than concerned by the prospect of being detained. There's something else you should know. My father is holding a press conference tomorrow morning. He's going to publicly accuse your group of harassment and intimidation. This news rippled through the assembled veterans. Colonel Thompson's expression hardened, trying to control the narrative. Classic diversion tactic. We need to counter this immediately, Jessica said, already typing rapidly on her laptop. If he frames this as disgruntled veterans harassing a public official, it undermines our entire investigation. Can you get a story out tonight? The colonel asked her. Jessica nodded confidently. I have enough for a preliminary piece. Mayor accused of construction fraud, possible link to tragic accidents. My editor will run it if I can get two named sources. You have me, Sarah volunteered immediately. And me, Jake added. Jessica smiled grimly. Good enough for now. I'll need detailed statements from both of you before I leave. As Jessica prepared to interview Sarah and Jake, Doc Martinez approached Dean. You look exhausted, young man. When did you last eat? Dean seemed startled by the question, by the first hint of kindness he'd received since arriving. This morning, I guess. Doc nodded as if this confirmed a diagnosis. Sit down before you fall down. I'll find you something to eat while the colonel decides what to do with you. Dean obeyed, sinking into a chair near the wall, suddenly looking every bit his 19 years a boy and over his head, caught between opposing forces. Colonel Thompson conferred quietly with Wild Bill and several other veterans, occasionally glancing toward Dean. Sarah couldn't hear their discussion, but their body language suggested disagreement. Jake positioned himself near Sarah. Jessica began her interview, recording their statements about the morning's events and the evidence they had uncovered. Throughout the process, Sarah found herself watching Dean trying to reconcile the bully from the diner with this subdued figure accepting a sandwich from Doc Martinez. People were complex, she reminded herself. Her father had been both the stern disciplinarian she remembered and the young biker in the photographs. Perhaps Dean Harrington contained similar contradictions. Jessica finished her interviews and packed up her laptop. I'll file this story tonight. It should hit the morning edition and the wire services. Once it breaks, we'll have a small window before Harrington starts damage control. The colonel nodded. We'll be ready. Bill escort Jessica back to her car and make sure she leaves safely. As Wild Bill and Jessica departed, the colonel turned his attention back to Dean. If you're sincere about helping us, we'll need everything you know about your father's operation. Names, dates, projects that might have similar defects. Dean straightened in his chair. I can do that, and I know where he keeps his private files, the ones that would never appear in official records. The colonel raised an eyebrow. You'd help us obtain those, yes, Dean confirmed, but we'd have to move quickly. Once he realizes I've turned against him, he'll destroy everything. Sarah watched this exchange with growing concern. Isn't that breaking and entering? I thought we were doing this legally. There are legal ways to obtain evidence, the colonel assured her. Search warrant subpoenas. But those require official investigations, which require evidence to initiate. It's a circular problem. So we're considering illegal means. Sarah concluded, not entirely comfortable with the idea. The colonel chose his words carefully. We're considering all options to secure justice for you and others harmed by Robert Harrington's actions. Sometimes the moral path and the legal path diverge. Sarah thought about this. Her father had been a man who believed in rules and order, but he had also been an iron veteran, part of a brotherhood that operated outside conventional boundaries. What would he advise in this situation? Before she could respond, her phone rang. Checking the display, she saw it was her mother. "Mom," she answered suddenly, aware of how late it had gotten. "I'm sorry, I should have called." Her mother's voice cut her off tight with fear. "Sarah, where are you? There are police at our house. They're asking questions about you and some motorcycle gang." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "I'm safe, Mom. I'm with friends of Dad's, the Iron veterans." "The Iron," her mother's voice faltered. "Sarah, come home now, please. Whatever you're involved in, it's not worth this." Colonel Thompson had moved closer, alerted by Sarah's expression. She covered the phone with her hand. "Police are at my house questioning my mother." The colonel's face darkened. "Harrington's moving faster than we anticipated." He gestured to two veterans near the door. "Reynolds, Williams, go to the Mitchell residence immediately. Identify yourselves as friends of Jim's and make sure Eleanor is safe." The men nodded, grabbing their jackets and keys before heading out. Sarah returned to her call. "Mom, some friends are coming to help. They knew Dad from his military days. Trust them, okay?" "Sarah, what have you gotten yourself into?" Her mother sounded close to tears. "The truth, Mom. About my accident, about Dad's death. I'll explain everything when I see you." Sarah hesitated, then added, "I love you." She ended the call, looking up at the colonel with determination. "I need to go home." He shook his head firmly. "Not yet. It's too dangerous until we know what we're dealing with." "That's my mother," Tira insisted. "I can't leave her to face this alone." "Reynolds and Williams will ensure her safety," the colonel assured her. "They're former special forces, more than capable of handling a few local police." Sarah wasn't satisfied. "This isn't a military operation, Colonel. It's my life and my mother's. I have to go home." Jake stepped forward. "I'll take her. I can keep her safe and bring her back if necessary." The colonel considered this, clearly weighing options and risks. "Very well. But take the back roads, avoid main streets where the sheriff might have patrols." Dean spoke up unexpectedly. "My father will have people watching Sarah's house. They'll follow anyone who leaves with her." All eyes turned to him. The colonel's expression was calculating. "You seem very certain about your father's tactics." Dean shrugged, uncomfortable under their scrutiny. "I've seen how he operates when someone threatens his interests. He's thorough." "Then we'll need a diversion," Wild Bill announced, having returned from escorting Jessica. "Something to draw attention away from Sarah's departure." The colonel nodded slowly, a plan clearly forming in his mind. "Bill, take 5 men and your bikes. Make yourselves visible on the main road heading toward the mayor's neighborhood. Nothing illegal, just enough presence to attract attention." Bill grinned, a spark of the younger man showing through his weathered features. "Like old times." Meanwhile, the colonel continued, "Jake will take Sarah home through back roads. Dean, you stay here with Doc and myself. I have more questions about these documents." Sarah felt a moment of vertigo as the veterans sprang into action around her. Within minutes, Wild Bill and his chosen riders were pulling on leather jackets and gloves, checking their motorcycles with practiced efficiency. Jake helped Sarah gather her belongings, speaking quietly about the route they would take. Dean watched all this with a strange expression, something between awe and regret. "They move like a military unit." "They are a military unit," Doc Martinez told him, "just without the uniforms. Decades of training don't disappear with discharge papers." Outside engines roared to life as Wild Bill's team prepared to create their diversion. The sound sent a shiver down Sarah's spine, not of fear, but of recognition. These were the sounds that had heralded help this morning at the diner, the mechanical voice of justice approaching. Jake wheeled Sarah toward the side door where his truck was parked. Readied, Sarah looked back at the assembled veterans at Dean sitting uncomfortably under the colonel's watchful eye at the wall of photographs documenting decades of brotherhood. In just one day, her understanding of her father, her accident, and her hometown had been completely upended. Nothing would be the same after tonight. Ready? She confirmed, feeling the weight of her father's legacy settling on her shoulders like an invisible mantle. As Jake helped her into his truck and stowed her wheelchair in the back, Sarah could hear the thunderous departure of Wild Bill's joint team, Harley engines echoing across the night like a battle cry. The sound faded as Jake drove them away from the clubhouse, taking a narrow service road that wound behind the abandoned industrial area. Sarah stared out the window at the passing shadows of Millhaven. The town she had known all her life suddenly seemed alien, a place of secrets and corruption hidden beneath familiar facades. But there was comfort in knowing she wasn't facing these revelations alone. The Iron veterans had her back just as they had once stood beside her father. Jake drove in silence for several minutes before speaking. Your father would be proud of you, you know, standing up against Harrington, not backing down when things got tough. Sarah turned from the window to study his profile in the dim dashboard light. Did you know him well? My father? Jake kept his eyes on the road, navigating the unfamiliar back route with careful attention. As well as any junior officer knows, a senior non-com, I suppose. He was tough, but fair. Pushed us harder than anyone, but never asked for anything he wasn't willing to do himself. He smiled slightly at a memory. Once during a training exercise, I fell behind. Exhaustion, dehydration. Your father could have failed me right there, but instead, he stayed back, got me on my feet, and helped me catch up with the group. That sounds like him, Sarah said softly. He talked about you all the time, Jake continued. Showed us pictures of your gymnastics meets. Said you had more determination in your little finger than most soldiers had in their whole bodies. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them away. I wish he could see me now. I'm not sure he'd recognize the person I've become. He'd recognize your courage, Jake assured her. That hasn't changed. They turned onto a tree-lined street that would eventually lead to Sarah's neighborhood. In the distance, they could hear motorcycle engines, the Iron veterans creating their diversion as planned. Do you think Dean is telling the truth? Sarah asked suddenly, about wanting to help us. Jake considered the question carefully. I think he's telling a version of the truth. Whether it's the whole truth remains to be seen. The colonel doesn't trust him. The colonel has survived this long by being cautious, Jake replied. But he's also a good judge of character. If he thought Dean was lying outright, he wouldn't have let him stay at the clubhouse. They fell silent as Jake turned onto Sarah Street, approaching her house with headlights dimmed. Several vehicles were parked outside, including a police cruiser and what appeared to be an unmarked town car. Trouble, Jake muttered, slowing the truck. That's Sheriff Morris's personal vehicle, not just a patrol car. Sarah leaned forward, anxiety clenching in her stomach. We need to get inside. My mom's alone with them. Not alone, Jake corrected, pointing to a motorcycle parked discreetly in the shadow of a large oak tree. Reynolds is already here. He parked the truck a few houses away, hidden from direct view of Sarah's home. Wait here while I assess the situation. No, Sarah said firmly. This is my home and my mother. I'm going in. Jake started to argue, but recognized the determination in her expression, the same look he had seen in her father's eyes during particularly challenging training exercises. All right, but stay behind me until we know what we're dealing with. He helped her into her wheelchair, and they approached the house cautiously. Through the front windows, they could see several figures in the living room, one of them gesturing emphatically. As they reached the porch, Sarah could hear her mother's voice, strained but resolute. I've told you everything I know. My daughter is 19 years old and free to associate with whomever she chooses. Unless you have a warrant, I'd like you to leave my home. Sarah exchanged a glance with Jake, drawing strength from his steady presence. Then she pushed open the front door, wheeling herself into the center of the confrontation that would change everything. Her mother's face registered shock, then relief at seeing her. Sheriff Morris turned slowly, his expression hardening when he spotted Jake behind her. Major Reynolds stood near the fireplace, his posture relaxed but vigilant, a silent guardian in this civilian battlefield. And there, seated comfortably in Sarah's father's old armchair, like he belonged there, was Robert Harrington, his politician's smile failing to mask the cold calculation in his eyes. Ah, Sarah, the mayor said smoothly, rising to his feet. We've been having the most interesting conversation about your new friends. Mayor Robert Harrington stood in the Mitchell family living room with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to commanding any space he occupied. His tailored suit and carefully styled silver hair projected authority and success, the very image of the respected public servant he pretended to be. But Sarah saw him differently now. The facade had cracked, revealing the corruption beneath. "Sarah," her mother said, voice tight with worry, "where have you been? These men have been asking questions about you and some motorcycle club." Before Sarah could answer, Sheriff Morris stepped forward, thumbs hooked in his belt loops, in a posture of casual dominance. "Miss Mitchell, we have concerns about your association with known troublemakers. The Iron Veterans have a history of disruptive behavior in this county. Is that what you call standing up for the truth, Sheriff?" Sarah kept her wheelchair positioned between Jake and her mother, creating a united front. "Or is troublemaker just your term for anyone who questions the mayor's business practices?" Robert Harrington's politician's smile never wavered, though something cold flickered in his eyes. "Sarah, I understand you're upset about your accident. It was a terrible tragedy. But allowing these men to manipulate your grief into a vendetta against me won't help your recovery." "Mm. Manipulate?" Sarah's voice remained steady despite the anger building inside her. "They showed me documents proving your construction company used substandard materials on Route 16 where my accident occurred. Materials that failed when they should have protected me." Sheriff Morris shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the mayor for guidance. Robert maintained his composed expression, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Young lady," he said with practiced patience, "construction contracts and material specifications are complex matters. Whatever papers these men showed you were likely taken out of context or deliberately misinterpreted to serve their agenda." Major Reynolds, who had remained silent by the fireplace, finally spoke. "Their agenda being justice for a young woman paralyzed by corporate negligence." Robert turned, seeming to truly notice Reynolds for the first time. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Major Thomas Reynolds, United States Army, retired," the veteran replied with military precision. "I served with Jim Mitchell in Korea, and I've reviewed those documents myself." Sarah's mother moved to stand beside her daughter's wheelchair, her initial shock giving way to protective anger. "Robert, why are you really here? Because it seems like you're trying to intimidate my daughter." "Eleanor, please." Robert spread his hands in a gesture of innocence. "I'm simply concerned. When I heard Sarah was spending time with a motorcycle gang—" "They're not a gang," Sarah interrupted. "They're veterans who serve this country with honor, something you wouldn't understand given your dishonorable discharge." The mayor's carefully composed expression finally cracked. His face flushed red as Sheriff Morris and Sarah's mother both turned to him in surprise. "That's a malicious lie," he snapped, his cultivated charm evaporating. Jake stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Sarah's wheelchair. "Is it Colonel Thompson seems to remember your military record quite clearly, as do several other Iron veterans who served when you did." Robert regained his composure with visible effort. "Ancient history distorted by men with grudges. My service record is a matter of public pride in this town." "Because you lied about it," Sarah pressed. "Just like you lie about everything else." The mayor's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. Whatever intimidation he had planned clearly wasn't working. "Sheriff, I believe we've taken enough of Mrs. Mitchell's time this evening. Thank you for your cooperation, Eleanor." Sheriff Morris nodded, though he appeared confused by the sudden retreat. "We'll be in touch if we have more questions." "You'll need a warrant next time," Sarah's mother replied coldly. "And a legitimate reason." The mayor paused at the door, looking back at Sarah with an expression that sent ice through her veins. It wasn't anger or even hatred. It was calculation, the look of a man reassessing his strategy. "Sarah," he said quietly, "think carefully about the path you're choosing. Some roads once taken don't lead back home." After they left, Sarah's mother sank onto the sofa, the strain of the confrontation finally showing in her face. "What have you gotten involved in?" Sarah, the mayor, and sheriff in our living room making veiled threats. Sarah wheeled herself closer, taking her mother's hands. "Mom, there's so much you don't know. About my accident, about Dad's death. The Iron veterans have evidence that Mayor Harrington's company deliberately cut corners on road safety. The guardrail that failed when my car went off the road was improperly installed and inspection records were falsified." Her mother's face paled. Are you saying your accident wasn't just bad luck? It was negligence at minimum, Jake confirmed, introducing himself properly to Sarah's mother. Ma'am, I served under your husband years ago. These veterans revered him, and they've been gathering evidence about Harrington construction for months. Major Reynolds added, Jim was investigating Robert Harrington before his death. We believe he discovered the same corruption we've now documented. Eleanor Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as she processed this information. James never mentioned any investigation to me. He probably wanted to protect you, Sarah suggested, just like he never told me about his involvement with the Iron Veterans. Her mother looked away, a complicated expression crossing her face. He did tell me. I asked him to keep it from you. I wanted you to see your father as the respectable military man, not a biker. Sarah stared at her mother in shock. You knew it all this time? Eleanor nodded. Those men were his brothers in many ways. They were at his funeral, though they stayed in the background, out of respect for my wishes. She looked up at Reynolds. I never thanked them properly for the honor guard they provided. Jim earned that honor, Reynolds replied simply. Sarah felt pieces of her father's life clicking into place, creating a more complete picture than she'd ever had before. Mom, the Iron Veterans think Dad's death might not have been an accident either. Her mother's breath caught. What? There's no definitive proof, Jake cautioned Dunn. But the pattern of accidents befalling people who investigated Harrington construction is suspicious. Eleanor stood abruptly, moving to the mantelpiece where family photographs chronicled their lives. She touched one of James Mitchell in his dress uniform, eyes distant with memory. James was always a careful driver. I questioned the accident report, but the police insisted the road was wet. He took the curve too fast. Her voice trailed off. Mom, Sarah said gently, there's going to be a town council meeting next week. The Iron Veterans plan to present their evidence publicly. I've agreed to testify about my accident. Her mother turned alarm clear on her face. Sarah, if what you're saying is true, these people are dangerous. Robert Harrington didn't come here tonight out of concern. He came to warn you off. I know, Sarah admitted, but I can't back down. Not if there's a chance Dad was murdered for what he discovered. Not when other people might get hurt by the same negligence that put me in this chair. Eleanor looked between her daughter Jake and Reynolds, recognizing the resolve in their faces. James would be proud of you, she said finally, and terrified for you just as I am. Mrs. Mitchell, Reynolds said respectfully, the Iron Veterans have a plan to protect Sarah and expose Harrington legally. But after tonight, it would be safer if both of you stayed elsewhere until the council meeting. We have a safe house prepared, Jake added. The colonel anticipated Harrington might try to intimidate you. Sarah's mother straightened her shoulders, a flash of steel showing through her concern. I won't be driven from my home by threats. James faced worse in Korea and never backed down. Mom, Sarah began, but Eleanor raised a hand to stop her. However, she continued, I think Sarah should accept your protection. I have colleagues at the hospital who would notice if I suddenly disappeared from my shifts. I can be your eyes and ears here. Reynolds nodded with approval. Jim chose his wife well. Sarah wasn't convinced. I don't want to leave you alone. I'll be fine, her mother assured her. The hospital administrator is Judge Wallace's brother-in-law. If anything happens, I have direct access to the one judge in town Harrington doesn't control. The sound of motorcycles rumbling down the street interrupted their discussion. Moments later, Wild Bill Cooper knocked at the door, his weathered face grim. We need to move, he announced after Reynolds let him in. Jessica's story just hit the Tribune's website. Harrington will be damage controlling by morning. Jake helped Sarah gather essential items while her mother packed medications and clothing. Within 20 minutes, they were ready to leave, the reality of their situation settling over them like a heavy cloak. At the door, Sarah embraced her mother tightly. Be careful. Call the number Jake gave you if anything seems wrong. You're the one walking into the fire, Eleanor replied, kissing her daughter's forehead. Your father used to say courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right despite the fear. I remember, Sarah whispered, throat tight with emotion. Outside, several Iron Veterans had positioned their motorcycles as an escort. Jake helped Sarah into his truck, stowing her wheelchair in the back. As they pulled away, Sarah watched her childhood home recede in the side mirror, wondering when she would see it again and under what circumstances. The safe house turned out to be a cabin owned by one of the veterans, situated on 20 acres of woodland about 30 miles outside Millhaven. Remote enough to be secure, close enough to return quickly if needed. The cabin was surprisingly accessible with a recently constructed ramp to the porch and widened doorways that accommodated Sarah's wheelchair. Doc Martinez had us modify it last month, Wild Bill explained as they arrived. Said we needed a medical recovery location. Now we know what she was planning. Inside the cabin was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, 2 bedrooms, and a kitchen stocked with supplies. Colonel Thompson was waiting for them, along with Doc Martinez, and surprisingly Dean Harrington, who sat uncomfortably at the kitchen table. Your father made his move, the colonel said without preamble. Sheriff Morris and 2 deputies searched the clubhouse after you left. Fortunately, we anticipated this and relocated our evidence. Is everyone okay? Sarah asked, concerned for the veterans who had remained behind. Fine, the colonel assured her. They had a warrant technically legal if obviously manufactured, so we cooperated fully. They found nothing of value. Dean looked up from the table, his expression haunted. This is my fault. I should have warned you my father would use legal channels to harass you. We expected it, the colonel replied dismissively. Your father is nothing if not predictable in his tactics. Doc Martinez brought Sarah a cup of tea and a sandwich. You need to keep your strength up. Tomorrow will be challenging. What happens now? Sarah asked, accepting the food gratefully. The colonel spread a map of Millhaven across the table, various locations marked with military precision. Jessica's article has forced your father's hand, Dean. He'll need to respond publicly, which means he'll be visible. Meanwhile, we execute the next phase of our plan. Dean leaned forward, studying the map. He'll hold a press conference first thing tomorrow. Standard damage control. Deny everything, question the motives of his accusers, promise a full internal investigation that will never happen. Exactly as we want, the colonel confirmed. While he's busy playing to the cameras, we'll be gathering the final evidence we need. He pointed to a location marked on the map, the Harrington Construction Headquarters. Dean has provided the location of your father's private files. Tomorrow morning, Jake and Bill will accompany him to retrieve them while Robert is occupied elsewhere. Sarah frowned. Isn't that breaking and entering? Not with the owner's son providing access, the colonel explained. Dean's name is on the company papers as vice president, though it's largely a ceremonial title. He has legal right to enter the building and access company records. My father will claim I stole confidential documents, Dean warned. Let him, the colonel replied. By then, the documents will be in the hands of the state prosecutor's office and the media. The truth doesn't become less true because someone wishes to suppress it. Sarah studied Dean's face, still uncertain about his sudden conversion. Why are you really doing this? Yesterday you were threatening me, and today you're risking everything to help me. Dean met her gaze directly for the first time. Because I saw my future in my father's eyes tonight. The man he's become, calculating, cold, seeing people as obstacles to be removed. That's not who I want to be. He hesitated, then added more quietly, and because what happened to you was wrong. I can't change it, but I can help make sure it doesn't happen to someone else. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced, but she recognized genuine remorse when she saw it. I hope you mean that. Time will tell, the colonel observed, returning to the map. Now the council meeting is scheduled for Tuesday morning. That gives us 3 days to compile our case and prepare our presentation. Wild Bill tapped another location on the map. What about the accident site? If we're claiming the guardrail was improperly installed, we should document the current conditions before Harrington has a chance to make modifications. Already handled, the colonel replied. Sergeant Williams photographed and measured everything this afternoon. The original specifications called for support posts every 6 feet with specific depth requirements. The actual installation used posts every 10 feet inadequately anchored. The failure point in Sarah's accident shows clear evidence of this deficiency. Doc Martinez turned to Sarah. We'll need you to work with Jessica on your testimony. Personal impact statements are powerful, but they need to be focused and factual to withstand cross-examination. Sarah nodded, the reality of her role settling more firmly on her shoulders. She wasn't just a witness, now she was becoming the face of the case against Robert Harrington. I can do that. You should rest now, Doc advised, noting the fatigue evident in Sarah's posture. Tomorrow will be demanding. As the others continued planning, Jake helped Sarah to one of the bedrooms, which had been prepared with her needs in mind. The bed was positioned to allow easy transfer from her wheelchair and the attached bathroom had been similarly modified. "Will you be okay?" Jake asked as she settled in. "This is a lot to process in one day." Sarah smiled tiredly. 24 hours ago, I was just a girl in a wheelchair getting breakfast. Now I'm at the center of a conspiracy investigation with the motorcycle club and the mayor's son." Jake chuckled. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit surreal." "My father would have loved this," Sarah said, surprising herself with the realization. Not the danger, but the justice of it. Standing up against corruption, protecting the community. "That's exactly who he was," Jake agreed. "During training, he always said the purpose of strength is to shield others who don't have it." Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her grief for the father she had lost, pride in the legacy he had left, and determination to see this through. "Thank you for being here, Jake. For helping me understand who my father really was." He nodded, respecting the depth of her feelings without requiring her to explain them. "Get some rest, Sarah. Tomorrow we start bringing Robert Harrington to justice." Sleep came surprisingly easily, the emotional exhaustion of the day pulling Sarah into deep slumber. She dreamed of riding on a motorcycle, the wind in her hair, her legs strong and sure as they gripped the machine. In the dream, her father rode beside her, his face younger than she remembered, smiling with pride. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon sunlight streaming through the cabin windows. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't her bedroom, and yesterday's events seemed like another dream. Then reality reasserted itself as she heard the low murmur of voices from the main room. Using the modifications Doc had installed, Sarah managed her morning routine independently before wheeling herself into the main room. The Iron veterans were gathered around the television watching a news broadcast. On screen, Robert Harrington stood at a podium before Millhaven Town Hall, his expression grave as he addressed reporters. "These allegations are not only false but malicious," he was saying, his politician's voice projecting sincerity. "Harrington Construction has always maintained the highest standards of quality and safety. The suggestion that we would compromise public safety for profit is offensive and defamatory." A reporter off camera asked a question. "Mayor Harrington, the Tribune article specifically mentions your company's work on Route 16, where Sarah Mitchell was injured 2 years ago. Do you deny that substandard materials were used on that project?" Robert's expression hardened slightly. "That accident was a tragedy, and my heart goes out to the Mitchell family. But the investigation at the time was thorough and concluded that road conditions were not a factor. Miss Mitchell was driving too fast for conditions on a rainy night." Sarah felt heat rise in her face. "That's a lie. I was doing exactly the speed limit." "The police report confirmed it." Colonel Thompson nodded grimly. "He's rewriting history to protect himself. Classic tactics." On screen, another reporter pressed, "What about the documents cited in the article, construction specifications that weren't met, inspection reports with irregularities?" "I haven't seen these supposed documents," Robert replied dismissively, "but I welcome any legitimate investigation. Harrington Construction's records are open to proper authorities." He straightened his tie, a gesture Sarah now recognized as a tell when he was uncomfortable. "What concerns me is the source of these accusations. A group of aging motorcycle enthusiasts with a personal vendetta manipulating a vulnerable young woman for their own purposes." Wild Bill snorted in disgust. "Vulnerable? He hasn't met you properly, has he?" Sarah smiled despite her anger. "He's trying to discredit me before I can testify." "Standard character assassination," the colonel confirmed. "But it won't work if we have the documentation to back our claims." As if on cue, Jake and Dean entered from one of the bedrooms, both dressed in business attire that made them look like young executives. Dean carried a briefcase that hadn't been there the night before. "Ready?" the colonel asked them. Dean nodded, his face pale but determined. "My father will be tied up with the press conference and damage control meetings for at least 2 hours. The office will be minimally staffed." "Remember," the colonel instructed, "you're there officially as the vice president conducting company business. Jake is your consultant. Nothing illegal about it. Just walk in like you own the place," Wild Bill added. "Because technically you do." Dean attempted a smile that came out more like a grimace. "Let's get this over with." After they departed, Sarah's attention returned to the television, where Robert Harrington was concluding his statement. "I want to assure the people of Millhaven that these baseless accusations will not distract me from serving this community. The truth will prevail, as it always does." "On that," Colonel Thompson said quietly, "we finally agree." The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah worked with Jessica Reed, who had arrived early, refining her testimony for the council meeting. Doc Martinez helped her organize medical records that documented the extent of her injuries and subsequent treatments. The other veterans moved in and out of the cabin, some standing guard, others gathering additional witnesses from town who had seen Dean's behavior at the diner. Shortly after noon, Jessica's phone rang. She answered, listened intently, then turned to the group with excitement. "That was my editor. The story's blowing up. 3 other families who lost loved ones on Harrington construction projects have come forward with similar concerns about safety violations." "The dam is breaking," Colonel Thompson observed with satisfaction. "Once people believe they'll be heard, the truth has a way of emerging." A vehicle approached outside, gravel crunching under tires. Through the window, Sarah recognized Jake's truck. Her heart raced with anticipation as he and Dean entered, both looking grim but determined. Dean placed the briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing folders filled with documents. "My father's private records. Project budgets showing where costs were cut, emails ordering foremen to ignore safety regulations, and financial records of payments to inspectors and local officials." The colonel examined the papers with methodical precision, his expression darkening as he read. "This goes beyond negligence. This is systematic corruption and fraud." "There's more," Jake added, pulling a small flash drive from his pocket. Digital copies of everything plus voice recordings Dean found in his father's computer. Conversations with Sheriff Morris and 2 council members discussing how to handle problems with inspections. Sarah stared at the evidence, the full scope of Robert Harrington's corruption becoming clear. He built his entire business on cutting corners and bribing officials. "And his political career on covering it up," Dean confirmed, collapsing into a chair with the air of someone who had just completed an exhausting marathon. "There are records going back 15 years, including," he hesitated, glancing at Sarah with genuine regret, "including notes about your father's accident. It wasn't random, Sarah. Your father had scheduled a meeting with the State Transportation Department the day after he died." The room fell silent as the implications settled over everyone. Sarah felt a cold certainty in her stomach. "He had my father killed." "These records don't explicitly confirm that," Jake cautioned, "but they establish motive and a pattern of eliminating threats." Colonel Thompson carefully organized the documents, his military training evident in his methodical approach. "This is enough to launch a formal investigation by state authorities. Jessica, can you get copies to your editor and to the Attorney General's office?" The young reporter nodded, already photographing key documents with her phone. "The Tribune's lawyers will verify everything before publication, but this is more than enough to substantiate our reporting." "What about the council meeting?" Sarah asked. "Do we still need to go through with it if we're taking this to state authorities?" "Absolutely," the colonel replied firmly. "Public accountability matters. The state investigation could take months, and Harrington might find ways to obstruct it. But a public presentation of evidence with media present creates pressure that can't be easily dismissed." Wild Bill, who had been reviewing some of the financial records, looked up with a grim expression. "There's something else here. Payments to a man named Victor Kelso listed as security consultant. Large amounts always after problems were resolved." The colonel's expression darkened. "I know that name. Former military contractor with a questionable reputation. Specializes in problems that disappear permanently." "My father's hitman," Dean said flatly, the color draining from his face. "I've met him. He comes to the house sometimes for private meetings." Sarah felt a chill run through her. If these documents become public, what's to stop him from silencing us the same way he silenced my father? "Us," Wild Bill said, simply gesturing to the assembled veterans. "Kelso may be dangerous, but he's one man. We're a brotherhood." "Nevertheless," the colonel added, "we take no unnecessary risks. From now until the council meeting, no one goes anywhere alone. We operate with full security protocols." The gravity of the situation settled over the group. They weren't just exposing corruption anymore. They were potentially facing a killer who had already eliminated at least one threat to Robert Harrington's empire. "I should call my mother," Sarah said, suddenly concerned. "If Kelso targets people close to those who threaten my father—" "Already handled," Doc Martinez assured her. "2 of our members are watching your home, and I personally spoke with the hospital's head of security. Your mother is never alone." Sarah nodded gratefully, amazed at the veterans' thoroughness. These men and women had planned for contingencies she hadn't even considered, their military training translating seamlessly to this civilian battlefield. The remainder of the day passed in focused preparation. The documents were organized into clear presentations with copies made for council members, the media, and state authorities. Sarah refined her testimony, with Jessica's help finding the balance between emotional impact and factual precision. Dean provided insight into his father's likely counterarguments, helping them prepare rebuttals. By evening, exhaustion had settled over the group. Doc Martinez insisted everyone rest, knowing the coming days would require clear minds and steady nerves. Sarah found herself on the cabin's porch watching the sunset paint the Pennsylvania hills in gold and crimson. Jake joined her, offering a cup of hot chocolate. "Penny for your thoughts," he asked, settling into a chair beside her wheelchair. Sarah sipped the sweet drink, gathering her thoughts. "I keep thinking about my father, how much I didn't know about him. The Iron Veterans, his investigation into Harrington, the danger he faced alone." "Not alone," Jake corrected gently. "He had the brotherhood, even if he kept them separate from his family life." "Still," Sarah persisted, "I wish I'd known the whole man, not just the parts he showed me." Jake considered this. "I think all parents do that to some extent, show their children the best versions of themselves. Your father wanted you to see strength, honor, discipline. The parts that would inspire you, not the struggles or the dangers." "Maybe," Sarah conceded, "but knowing what I know now, I would have told him I could handle the whole truth, that I was stronger than he thought." "He knew how strong you were," Jake assured her. "He told us stories about his daughter, the gymnast, who never quit, who practiced until her hands bled, who fell 100 times and got up 101. Sarah smiled at the memory. "He used to time my practices. Said if I could push through when I was tired, I could push through anything." "He was right," Jake observed, looking out at the deepening twilight. "Look at you now." The simple statement touched Sarah deeply. Since her accident, most people had treated her with either pity or awkward encouragement. Jake saw her strength as a natural extension of who she'd always been, not as some triumph over adversity. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me see myself through my father's eyes." Inside the cabin, the telephone rang. Colonel Thompson answered, his voice carrying clearly through the open window. The conversation was brief but evidently significant, as he immediately called for everyone's attention. "That was our contact in the sheriff's department," he announced when Sarah and Jake rejoined the group. "Robert Harrington has filed formal charges against the Iron Veterans for harassment, intimidation, and theft of company documents. Sheriff Morris has issued arrest warrants for myself, Wild Bill, and several other members." "Can he do that?" Sarah demanded, outraged. "The documents prove his corruption." "The documents aren't in evidence yet," the colonel explained patiently. "Until they are formally submitted to authorities, they're just papers we possess. Papers Robert claims were stolen." "But I authorized their removal," Dean protested. "I'm a company officer." "And your father will claim you were coerced or manipulated," Jake pointed out. "It's a delay tactic designed to disrupt our momentum before the council meeting." Colonel Thompson's expression remained calm, the seasoned officer assessing battlefield conditions. "This changes nothing in our overall strategy. It simply means those of us named in the warrants must avoid arrest until after the council presentation." "You'll be fugitives." Sarah realized the implications dawning on her. "Temporarily," the colonel confirmed. "Once the evidence is publicly presented and in the hands of state authorities, local charges will become secondary." Wild Bill seemed almost amused by the development. "Wouldn't be the first time I've operated behind enemy lines." The telephone rang again. This time Doc Martinez answered, her expression growing concerned as she listened. "It's for you, Sarah. Your mother." Sarah took the receiver, heart racing. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine." Eleanor Mitchell's voice came through clearly, though pitched low as if she didn't want to be overheard. "But there's something you need to know. Sheriff Morris and 2 deputies searched our house this afternoon with a warrant. They claim to be looking for stolen documents." "They won't find anything," Sarah assured her. "We have everything secure here." "That's not all," her mother continued. "After they left, I received a phone call. A man I didn't recognize. He said," her voice faltered, "he said I should convince you to drop this crusade or I might have an accident like your father's." Cold fear washed over Sarah. Mom, you need to get out of there now. Come to the cabin. I can't leave, Eleanor replied with surprising resolve. I have patients who depend on me, but I've spoken with Judge Wallace's brother. I'm staying at their house tonight with their security system and their very large dog. It's not enough, Sarah insisted. These people killed Dad. They won't hesitate. Sarah, her mother interrupted firmly. Your father faced worse in Korea and never backed down from what was right. I won't dishonor his memory by running now. The determination in her mother's voice was so familiar, the same stubborn courage Sarah had inherited from both parents. At least accept protection from the Iron Veterans. Already arranged, Eleanor confirmed. Two very capable gentlemen are escorting me to and from the hospital. Sergeant Williams and a Mr. Martinez. Sarah felt a measure of relief. The Iron Veterans had anticipated this threat as well. Be careful, Mom, please. You're the one they really want to silence, her mother reminded her. Your testimony is what they fear most. Promise me you will take every precaution. I promise, Sarah assured her, though the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. After the call ended, Sarah relayed the threat to the others. Colonel Thompson's expression hardened. Robert's getting desperate. He's escalating from legal harassment to outright intimidation. Kelso, Dean said grimly, that's his style. Veiled threats creating fear before acting. Then we accelerate our timeline, the colonel decided. The council meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, but we can't wait. Tomorrow morning we take our evidence directly to the media and state authorities simultaneously. Jessica nodded in agreement. My editor has contacts in the Attorney General's office. We can coordinate for maximum impact. What about my mother? Sarah asked, still shaken by the threat. We'll move her tonight, Colonel Thompson assured her, regardless of her objections. Williams and Martinez have their orders. As the veterans mobilized around this new plan, Sarah felt the momentum building toward an inevitable confrontation. Robert Harrington had spent years building his empire on corruption, silencing those who threatened to expose him. But he had never faced an opponent like the Iron Veterans men who had survived war, who understood strategy and sacrifice, who operated with the discipline of soldiers and the determination of those fighting for justice. Get some rest, Doc Martinez advised Sarah. Tomorrow will be the most challenging day yet. Sleep came fitfully that night. Sarah's dreams filled with dark roads and failing guardrails, her father's face appearing briefly before fading into shadow. She woke before dawn, the cabin quiet except for the soft movements of veterans taking turns on watch. Jake was in the kitchen making coffee. He offered Sarah a cup, his expression suggesting he too had slept poorly. Big day. The biggest, she agreed, accepting the steaming mug. Is everything ready? Jake nodded. The colonel's been up for hours organizing the final details. Your mother is safe. They moved her to a different location last night. Dean's preparing to make a formal statement to the media. And the evidence? Copies are already on their way to the state capitol with two veterans. The originals will be presented at a press conference this morning, then delivered to state police. Sarah sipped her coffee, drawing strength from its warmth and familiarity. What happens after, assuming we succeed, and Robert Harrington faces justice? Jake considered the question. The legal process will take time. Investigations, possibly trials. For you personally, he hesitated. What do you want to happen next, Sarah? The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on exposing the truth about her accident and her father's death that she hadn't thought beyond that goal. I don't know, she admitted. Everything's changed so quickly. The Sarah Mitchell who went for pancakes 3 days ago doesn't exist anymore. No, Jake agreed. She's become something more. Before Sarah could respond, Wild Bill entered the kitchen, his expression grave. We've got movement. Sheriff's Department vehicles approaching from the main road. Colonel Thompson appeared from the back room already fully dressed. How many? 3 that I can see, probably more coming from other directions. The colonel nodded unsurprised. They found us sooner than expected. Initiate Plan Delta. The cabin erupted into controlled activity. Veterans moved with practiced efficiency, gathering essential documents and equipment. Dean emerged from one of the bedrooms looking anxious but determined. Sarah, Colonel Thompson addressed her directly. You, Jessica, and Dean will leave now with Jake through the back trail. The 4 of you are carrying the most important weapons. We have your testimonies and the evidence. What about the rest of you? Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. We'll create a diversion, Wild Bill said with a grim smile. Give you time to reach the Tribune offices in Harrisburg. Sarah shook her head. They'll arrest you. Eventually, the colonel acknowledged, but not before we've ensured your safe departure. This isn't our first tactical retreat, Miss Michelot. The enormity of their sacrifice struck Sarah deeply. These men, already in their 60s and 70s, were risking imprisonment to protect her and ensure the truth reached the public. There has to be another way. There isn't, the colonel said simply, and we made this choice before you ever joined us. Your father would have done the same for any of our children. Jake appeared with Sarah's packed bag, slinging it over his shoulder. We need to move now. The sheriff's vehicles are less than a mile out. With a heavy heart, Sarah allowed Jake to wheel her toward the cabin's rear exit where an off-road vehicle waited. Dean and Jessica followed, carrying the precious documentation. At the door, Sarah paused, looking back at the assembled veterans. Men who had fought in Korea, Vietnam, and a dozen other conflicts, now preparing for one final battle on the home front. Thank you, she said, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. For everything. Colonel Thompson saluted her, a gesture of profound respect. Honor your father's memory. Sarah, tell the truth no matter what. Outside, Jake helped her into the waiting vehicle, a modified Jeep with room for her wheelchair in the back. As they pulled away down a narrow forest trail, Sarah heard the approaching sirens and saw veterans taking positions around the cabin, ready to delay the inevitable as long as possible. They'll be okay, Jake assured her, though his voice lacked conviction. The colonel has dealt with worse situations than an overzealous sheriff. Sarah nodded, forcing herself to focus on the mission ahead rather than those left behind. The winding trail eventually connected with a secondary road where a nondescript sedan waited, engine running. Vehicle transfer, Jake explained as he helped Sarah into the new car. Standard evasion protocol. Dean and Jessica loaded the documents in Sarah's wheelchair, then joined them in the sedan. Jake drove with the careful precision of someone trained in evasive techniques, taking back roads and changing direction frequently to ensure they weren't followed. The press conference is scheduled for 10 o'clock at the Tribune's Harrisburg office, Jessica explained as they drove. My editor has confirmed reporters from major outlets will attend, plus representatives from the Attorney General's office and state police. My father will try to stop us, Dean warned. He has contacts throughout the region. Then we don't give him time to mobilize them, Jake replied, increasing their speed on a clear stretch of highway. We'll be in Harrisburg before he realizes where we're headed. The morning sun climbed higher as they drove, illuminating the Pennsylvania countryside in crisp autumn light. Sarah watched familiar landscapes give way to unknown territory, a physical journey that mirrored her emotional one. 3 days ago, she had been defined by her limitations, her life contained within the boundaries of Millhaven and her wheelchair. Now she was racing toward a confrontation that would expose corruption and perhaps deliver justice for her father. They reached Harrisburg without incident, navigating morning traffic to reach the Tribune's downtown offices. Security guards met them at a side entrance, escorting them through the building to a conference room already buzzing with activity. Journalists arranged recording equipment while photographers tested lighting. A table at the front displayed nameplates for each speaker: Sarah Mitchell, Dean Harrington, Jessica Reed, and representatives from state agencies. Jake helped Sarah into her wheelchair and positioned her near the table. This is it, he said quietly. Everything we've worked for comes down to the next hour. Sarah nodded, surprised to find her nervousness had given way to calm resolve. I'm ready. Jessica approached, her professional demeanor in place, though excitement shone in her eyes. We're making history today, Sarah. Small-town corruption rarely gets this level of attention. It's not about attention, Sarah replied. It's about truth. The conference room doors opened, admitting a stream of reporters and photographers. Camera flashes illuminated the room. As Sarah took her position at the table, the documents arranged before her like weapons of a different kind. Dean sat beside her, his face pale but determined, while Jessica took the moderator's position. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jessica called the press conference to order. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Today we present evidence of systematic corruption, fraud, and criminal negligence by Harrington Construction and Millhaven Mayor Robert Harrington. As Jessica outlined the allegations, Sarah studied the assembled media. Most were focused on the sensational aspects: the mayor's corruption, the cover-ups, the possible murders. Few seemed to recognize what Sarah now understood clearly, This wasn't just about one corrupt official or one negligent company. It was about the courage to stand against power, to demand accountability, even when the cost was high. When her turn came to speak, Sarah wheeled herself to the microphone, feeling the weight of her father's legacy guiding her words. 2 years ago, my car went off Route 16 when a guardrail failed. The accident left me paralyzed from the waist down. But the real tragedy wasn't just my injury, it was learning that it could have been prevented. She detailed the evidence they had uncovered, explained the pattern of negligence and corruption, and described her father's efforts to expose the truth before his death. Her voice remained steady, even as she addressed the most painful revelations. I believe my father was murdered because he discovered what we're presenting today. I can't bring him back, and I may never walk again. But I can ensure that no other family experiences what mine has suffered because of corporate greed and political corruption. Dean spoke next, his testimony perhaps the most damning. The mayor's son publicly acknowledging his father's crimes, providing insider details that only he could know. The assembled reporters leaned forward, sensing the career-making story unfolding before them. As the press conference concluded, state police officers entered the room, conferring briefly with the Attorney General's representative before approaching the podium. Based on the evidence presented here today, the lead officer announced, the Pennsylvania State Police are opening a formal investigation into Robert Harrington and Harrington Construction. We're also dispatching officers to Millhaven to secure additional evidence and interview witnesses. Jessica fielded questions from reporters, keeping the focus on the documented evidence rather than speculation. Sarah felt a strange lightness, as if a burden she had carried for years had finally been set down. Whatever happened next, the truth was out. Her father's work was complete. As the room began to clear, Jake approached with a phone. Call for you. It's Wild Bill. Sarah took the phone eagerly. Bill, are you okay? What happened with the sheriff? The old veteran's chuckle came through clearly. We're fine. Morris and his deputies made a lot of noise, but once they realized you and the evidence were gone, they lost interest pretty quick, especially after the colonel informed them that state authorities had been notified of their arrival. So you weren't arrested? Oh, they took us in for questioning, Bill admitted. But without the mayor backing them, they didn't have much enthusiasm for the job. And now that your press conference has hit the news, they're more worried about saving their own skins than pursuing the mayor's vendetta. Relief washed over Sarah. What about my mother? Is she safe? Safe and proud as hell. She's watching you on the live television broadcast right now. After the call ended, Sarah found Dean standing alone by the window, watching the city below with a lost expression. What happens to you now? She asked, wheeling herself beside him. He shrugged, the gesture heavy with uncertainty. I don't know. I can't go home. My father will never forgive what I've done. He turned to face her. I don't regret it, though. For the first time in my life, I did something that actually matters. Sarah studied him, seeing not the arrogant bully from the diner, but a young man who had found the courage to break free from a toxic legacy. You could testify in the trials to come, help make sure justice is served completely. I will, he promised, whatever it takes to make amends. The Tribune's offices hummed with activity as the story spread across news networks. Reports came in from Millhaven State Police searching Harrington Construction headquarters, the sheriff's department. In disarray, Robert Harrington himself nowhere to be found. He's running, Dean predicted grimly when he heard this news. He has contingency plans, emergency funds hidden away. He won't get far, Jake assured them. Not with his face on every news channel and law enforcement agencies alerted. By late afternoon, confirmation came. Robert Harrington had been apprehended trying to cross the state line, a suitcase of cash and fake identification in his possession. The man who had ruled Millhaven through corruption and intimidation had fallen, his carefully constructed empire crumbling in a single day. As evening approached, arrangements were made for Sarah, Dean, and Jake to return to Millhaven under state police escort. The Iron veterans would meet them there, all charges against them dropped in light of the evidence they had helped uncover. Before leaving, Sarah gave a final interview to Jessica, who asked what she planned to do next. First, I'm going to hug my mother, Sarah replied with a smile. Then I'm going to visit my father's grave and tell him everything. After that, she paused, considering the unexpected freedom of possibilities before her. I think I'd like to work with other accident victims, help them rebuild their lives, and seek justice when the system fails them. Like a legal advocate, Jessica suggested. Sarah nodded, the idea taking shape as she spoke. Something like that, using my experience to help others navigate what I've been through. As they drove back toward Millhaven, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah watched the changing landscape, thinking about all that had happened in just 3 days. She had discovered her father's secret life, exposed corruption that had claimed lives, and found strength she hadn't known she possessed. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be legal battles, public scrutiny, and the ongoing challenge of rebuilding her life. But Sarah Mitchell was no longer defined by what she had lost. She was defined by what she had found: courage, purpose, and a legacy of justice that would honor her father's memory. As they crested a hill overlooking Millhaven, Sarah saw a line of motorcycles waiting at the town limit. The Iron veterans stood at attention beside their bikes, a guard of honor for her return. Among them was Colonel Thompson, his military bearing unmistakable even at a distance. "Welcome home," Jake said softly as they approached. Sarah smiled, watching the veterans salute as their car passed. Home had taken on a new meaning, not just a place, but a community of people committed to standing together against injustice. Her father's legacy, now her own. The Iron veterans fired up their engines, forming an escort as they entered the town. Their thundering advance announced a simple truth to everyone who heard: justice had finally come to Millhaven, riding on steel horses guided by men of iron will. And seated in the car at the center of this procession, Sarah Mitchell felt the weight of her wheelchair fade against the lightness in her heart. The road ahead was open, and for the first time since her accident, she faced it not with resignation, but with purpose, the daughter of a hero, becoming a hero in her own right.